Well, it's always good to be here at the City Club. I want to thank Jay and all the members and everyone who has gathered here today. It's a special day. We're going to hear from a history maker and someone who's a very good friend. I think a friend to all the children of our city of Chicago, indeed our state of Illinois. I've known Karen a little while, and I just want to give a little background, biographical background. We all want to hear what she has to say, but I know the first time I think I talked to Karen, I called her on my cell phone, and she was sitting in the stands at Forest Hills watching the U.S. Tennis Open. And she's a great fan of tennis, believes in tennis and exercise. She also is a buff, an opera buff. She told me her favorite opera when she was growing up was Madame Butterfly, but she knows opera like the back of her hand. And I think it's also noteworthy to know that Karen, as a teacher, was a master teacher of chemistry in our city of Chicago. A very important subject. We've got to emphasize science and technology, engineering and math for all of our students from from first grade on. And Karen understands how important that is. But she also is someone who comes from our city of Chicago, state of Illinois, went to Kenwood High School, Kenwood Academy, then went first to Mount Holyoke, a very good school indeed, but transferred to Dartmouth in 1972, I think. The very first year they were admitting women, and she was in the first class of women graduating from Dartmouth, first African-American woman of the whole class. So she's always been somebody who knows how to blaze trails, to make things happen. She is a person who understands how important it is to bring people together and organize. It's important to go early to bed, early to rise, work like hell, and organize. That's what Karen Lewis is all about. She's an organizer's organizer, but she also understands that teachers sacrifice some of their present to help their students' future. And she's done that her entire teaching career. She's one of the best of the best in Illinois. I'm really, really proud to introduce her to everybody at City Club. Karen Lewis. Come on forward, Karen.
First of all, I'd like to thank the City Club for asking me to come. This has been such a privilege. I'm all excited. I want to thank Tweed for working so hard. Where did Tweed go? I saw him a minute ago. He's working. And obviously Jay and Tom and the Board of Governors for inviting me. And I want to thank you all for this opportunity to be able to share the Chicago Teachers Union's vision for public education and the schools our students deserve. So, what do our students deserve? They deserve school reform that works, that's evidence-based. It's not based on a marketing scheme, and it's certainly not based on somebody's wishes who sits in a corner office with a spreadsheet making decisions. Our students deserve smaller classes and a robust, well-rounded, deep, rich curriculum, and in-school services that address their social, emotional, intellectual, and health needs. All of our students deserve culturally sensitive, non-biased, and equitable education. And I want to make sure people understand equitable is not the same as equal. I want to make sure we all understand that. And they deserve professional teachers who are treated as such, fully resourced school buildings, and a system that partners with parents. However, unfortunately, this is not the reality in the third largest district in our nation. What our students often get are under-resourced school buildings, a system that alienates their parents and discounts their voice as noise. Our students are subjected to ballooning class sizes, asbestos-lined bathrooms, and windows that refuse to open or shut. And despite the growing neighborhood violence, our students do not have enough counselors, social workers, nurses, and psychologists. They do not have adequate wraparound services, and students are subjected to school reform experiment after school reform experiment. And when those experiments do not work, our students, parents, and educators face the threat of having their schools closed or turned over to corporate interests with little to no education experience. Parents are forced to take off work in the middle of the week, and they used to have to stand in line as early as 6 o'clock. I understand at least we can go online now and register to speak. But for a chance to speak for 2 minutes to an unelected school board whose members often fidget away with their electronic gadgets, rarely giving the speakers the courtesy of even looking at them. Where if they protest or raise their voices in an unlikable tone, their microphones will be cut off so they can be properly chastised for daring to show emotion about their schools. And what about the public school educators, teachers, paraprofessionals, and clinicians? What is it they deserve, and what is the reality within CPS? We believe strongly that research-based strategies and proven models for improving the teaching profession should guide the maintenance and growth of a dedicated, experienced, and multiracial teaching staff in CPS. In Finland, a country known for high-performing students, teaching is a respected top career choice. Teachers have autonomy in their classrooms, work collectively to develop the school curriculum, and participate in shared governance of the school. They receive a free college education and teacher preparation program, and yet they are 100% unionized. The principals also belong to the same union. Teachers also receive strong professional support throughout their careers and ample time for collaboration with colleagues built into their workday. They are not rated, they are trusted. And by the way, they teach rarely more than 4 hours a day. Children in Finland don't even start school until they're 7 years old because there is a commitment to teaching children to play appropriately. But in Finland, we also have a 4% child poverty rate, which Finns find offensive. In the United States, we have a 24% child poverty rate, and there is no outcry. That's a problem. Teachers in high-performing countries have equal amounts of teaching and preparation time in their day. And this is also true for unionized teachers who work at University of Chicago laboratory schools. In Japan, teachers work together on lessons, observe the teaching collaboratively created lessons, and discuss those lessons as a regular part of their routine. Our own Quest Center is in the process of developing a very similar concept for here. It's called lesson study, and it's what people in Japan just call PD. Teachers in Japan spend less than 40% of their working hours over the school year teaching. But in reality, CPS policies fail to support stable work environments in the most struggling schools. Educators work in fear and under constant threat of being labeled unsatisfactory and or fired. In CPS, teacher turnover is the highest in low-income African-American schools, with many losing a quarter of their teaching staff each year. That is expensive and unconscionable, and we should make a sincere effort to change that. So I want to talk a little bit about school reform versus school deform. Contrary to popular belief, school reform in Chicago has been a dismal failure. However, if you go to districts outside, they have been regaled with the stories of the amazing miracle reforms that have happened in Chicago, and that the former CEO of CPS, who is now the Secretary of Education, is exporting to the rest of the country. And they say, oh, this is the core, this is the absolute epitome of school reform. So how well is it working? Well, I think it depends on who you ask. So what we're concerned about is the marketing of a school reform model that does not work. We have found that the work that has been done to try to turn around the lowest performing schools is unfortunately not as bright as the markets will tell you. What we do know is that schools that are on an upward trajectory that get turned over start doing well, but for some reason, the people that take them over are getting the credit for the work that was done before. It was very interesting to me that last year, test scores were the highest they've ever been, graduating rates were highest than they've ever been. That was without a longer school day, that was without a whole lot of other things. But guess what? Our children are on an upward trajectory, but it's incremental. And for some, it's not fast enough. When people talk about the graduation rate being a dismal 60%, what they do not realize, once again, is the highest in history. And when CPS was not graduating students, where did they go? Well, there were jobs in the stock market, in the stockyards, those are gone. There were jobs in the steel mills, those are gone. The key is the jobs that students could go into without a high school diploma that could feed their families and send their children to college are now gone. So there's an outcry. Why has school reform been a bust despite the millions of dollars poured into the hands of local reform architects? Well, to answer this, we must look at a series of questions outlined by Professor Lonnie Guinier. One of the things that's easy for us to do is to identify who the winners and losers are. And one of the easiest ways to do that is to look at test score data. So we can see who the winners and losers are. But what Professor Guinier says, you have to go a little deeper when you're assessing this information. You have to also ask, who made the rules to the game? Because whoever makes the rules to the game has an advantage. But what Professor Guinier also says that is extraordinarily important is that what are the stories the winners tell the losers to keep them playing the game? These are 3 questions that I would love for you to think about, unpack, and look deeply whenever someone tells you that they have a miracle cure to fix what's wrong with public education. We cannot fix what's wrong with our schools until we are prepared to have honest conversations about poverty and race. We don't like having those conversations because they make us uncomfortable. But until we do, we will be mired in the no excuses mentality. Poverty doesn't matter. Poverty matters a lot when you are teaching children who you know are distracted by their lives. Poverty matters a lot when you are teaching children who have seen trauma like none of us in this room can imagine. And poverty matters when children of middle and upper middle class parents whose parents have problems in their marriage, they may separate. Those children have access to being in therapy for 2, maybe 3 years in order to learn how to cope with the trauma of the brokenness of their families. When we have students who have seen their own parents murdered in front of their eyes. We have children who not only have no fathers at home, we have children with no mothers. That is a trauma that most people do not recover from without intense emotional support. And then we punish those same children with a very restrictive discipline policy who cannot sit still and pay attention because at some point they have not had the care and love and nurturing of a parent. So who's really winning when all of the corporate meddling has created an entire generation of young people who lack critical thinking skills, who are disengaged, and who face even more polarization in this economic society? And how does a district fight the status quo when it is the status quo? The real status quo in Chicago public schools is a lack of guarantees to a diverse, broad, rich curriculum and wraparound services. You're going to hear me say this over and over again, because I truly believe those of us that teach know you have to hit them 3 times before you go. There are 432 social workers for 405,000 children. That should be a shame. We have 92 schools, elementary schools, without playgrounds. That should be a shame. We have less than 300 nurses for 405,000 students. And for many of us, the idea of working in the summer without air conditioning in 2012 is not even real. But these are the lives of our children. And the real status quo is the use of standardized tests to determine instruction and the success of our students and to decide the survival of neighborhood schools. The status quo is the constant churn of school improvement programs, district administrators, and so-called school leaders, and the top-down decision-making that places the views of corporate leaders and hedge fund managers over the voices of parents and communities. There's a problem with that. And ultimately, the status quo is the notion that we can improve education and life outcomes for poor and disadvantaged children by cutting funding for public schools and instead imposing competition, profit-making, risk, and other failed free market concepts into our schools and communities. Our communities do not need top-down assaults and the constant turnaround of their teachers and their learning institutions. What schools need are the resources to succeed and the freedom to create new environments where meaningful, inquiry-based learning is top priority, not the outcomes in a bubble sheet. Governor Quinn mentioned that I was a master teacher. 10 years ago, I guess you say sat for National Board Certification. It is the most rigorous certification program for teachers in America. And it requires that you not only know content, but obviously pedagogy. Well, I am here to tell you that I renewed that certificate during the midst of this entire struggle for the last year. That on April 30th, I had my little package at the downtown post office at 11:58. Because as you can imagine, I was a little busy. But the one thing that shocked me was 10 years ago when I did the videos to get my national board certification. Assessment was a separate issue and discussed separately. This year, I did a video in which I taught teachers to think about how to get kids to think in patterns. This is what lays down good critical skills. So what I did was to recreate the process that Dmitri Mendeleev went through when he developed the periodic table. Excuse me if I get a little geeked about this because this is pretty impressive. Mendeleev organized the periodic table by looking at the characteristics of each known element. Okay? So he put them together in families. But what was so brilliant about Mendeleev was that he could guess and opine and suppose that there were elements that had not yet been discovered, simply based on the characteristics he knew they had to have. Now, maybe I'm just geeky, but that's pretty exciting stuff to me. That you have an understanding that something that you haven't even seen exists because you have the evidence for it. So I try to recreate that excitement about thinking with my own students. And I developed this periodic table game in which some sort of patterns start developing. And there are a lot of them. I have a lot of things going on at once. So kids can't just look at one thing and say that's the right answer. Okay? So the beauty of this is that when kids start, you see the lights start turning on and they get it and they know what the missing cards are, because what I do is I take cards out that are missing so they have to figure out what's going to be in that spot. And this year I did that exercise with some teachers. So I asked them what they thought they would get out of this and how they would use this activity with their own students. And to a teacher, every last one of them talked about assessment, assessment, assessment. Not the critical thinking skills, not the ability to predict, and not the ability to find the joy in learning that those of us went to school years ago are the beneficiaries of. This is wrong. This borders on child abuse, and it has to stop. I'm sorry. Two years ago, I was a teacher, and I thought I would always be a teacher because that's what my parents did. And I tried my best not to do it. I tried to do other things, and I got dragged in. But I love this profession. I'm passionate about it, and I will fight to defend it. And if people want to call me radical and militant, they can do so. Because I see the results of failed policies. When I have a student come to me basically in tears because she doesn't understand what I'm asking her to do scientifically, because as an elementary school student, she never had science. That is criminal. How do you not have science? And she said to me, because I went to school in the hood, which I would have never guessed because she spoke perfectly standard English. And she said to me, We concentrated on reading and math because that's what was tested. And our school is in danger of being closed. And I can tell you right now, there is something wrong that we put that much pressure on children for them to have to make the decisions on what happens to the adults. So when I hear people say students first, if you believe in students first, you don't need a sign that tells you that, you just do it. I know I'm giving corporate leaders, the blues, but since you all brought me here, oh well. Gotta be me. Corporate leaders constantly and unaccountably attempted to bend public education policy in Chicago. And guess what? This is nothing new. Daniel Burnham had his mouth in people's education business over 100 years ago. The business community will always be involved because they have what they want. They want trained people to do their work. But I am here to tell you there's a difference between training and education. And if we're going to be training, then let's just call it that and be done with it. But then let's change the name, and we're going to have the board of training. We're not going to have the board of education, because education is what makes your life wonderful. It is what makes your life worth living. If you come from neighborhoods that have been sorely neglected by the very people who all of a sudden love poor and black and brown children, but for some reason hate their parents. Oh, I'm saying it. Yes, I did. Yes, I did. You cannot divorce children from their communities and from their parents any more than you can divorce teachers from their union. Oops, who said that? See here. So I have a whole bunch of other statistics and whatnot, and I'm not going to read any of that because I think I've probably made my point. But there are a couple of things I do want to draw your attention to. I do not like the idea that privatization schemes for public assets are okay. Anyone that parked outside knows the parking meter piece. Don't have to mention that again. But when public assets are handed over to private operators, and things happen. Our experience has never been that service gets better, even though that's what we've always been told. I know that it gets more expensive. And I am concerned about the way we're going. I am concerned that in the state of Louisiana, that has the absolute highest per capita mass incarceration rate of human beings, that many of those prisons are privately run and are owned and operated by the sheriffs. The conflict of interest, the not drawing the dots to see who belongs to whom and where they fit, why one person over here is donating money to an organization that believes that teacher tenure is the worst thing since sliced bread, and that same person has interest in the testing company, Pearson, that kind of owns everything now, including national boards. These are the kinds of things that we are going to continue to do. We're going to draw these dots. We're going to make this stuff available, because make a good decision. My problem with the market, the free market for public schools, is that caveat emptor. Yes, I had 4 years of Latin. Thank you, Kenwood High School. 7 years of French. Thank you, Kosminski and Kenwood. Caveat emptor, let the buyer beware, is not an acceptable approach for public education. Public education is a common good. Publicly funded public education is worth fighting for. Thank you. And I would like to close with a personal pledge for ethical use of student data. This came from a woman who works at a school where student data is never going to be a problem for her. She happens to be very fortunate to work in a very well-resourced school. She will never have to worry about her school closing down, but she leaves us with this. I am a child-driven teacher, not a data-driven teacher. Standardized test scores will be used with multiple measures when making instructional decisions. I will keep my students' test scores in confidentiality. I refuse to publish them in any public place, as in a data wall or other devices. I will hold the confidentiality of my colleagues concerning their students' test scores. I will communicate with my students' families about the frequency and time involved in standardized testing. I will be mindful of the inherent bias in standardized testing, and I will advocate for any student who is impacted by this bias. I refuse to accept praise, awards, or payment based on my students' test scores. There's a pledge, personal pledge for the ethical use of student data, and I just happened to find it on the net from one of our members. So I would like to thank you for giving me this opportunity to address you. I know you have many, many, many questions. And I want you to know that my personal pledge is that it's one thing for me to sit up here and criticize, because I'm good at that. But I want you to also know that I am also about providing solutions to the problems and working with the people who make the decisions, because ultimately that's what's best for my children. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Karen, you might imagine we have a number of questions.
Just a couple, right?
And some of them actually came in after you spoke. And for the record, just so everyone knows, I was the moderator when Karen was running for union president. And yes, it was a dangerous position, but as I recollect, she was not the most radical person there. Let the record, I know this may come as offensive to you, but there were a couple there that, okay, enough of that. This is from the one and only Stella Black. Can you convince me that the tier system worked and benefits the student?
I'm not exactly sure I know what you mean by the tiered system. Are you talking about the one we currently have, where there's the selective enrollments and the charters? All right, so I think we need a history lesson for people that might not know what that means. So for years and years and years, Chicago's schools were just basically based on where you lived. It was a neighborhood piece. There were a couple of selective enrollment schools. There was Lane Tech, which you had to take a special test to get in, Lynn Bloom, and no, Whitney Young wasn't even in existence. This is like before my time. Okay. This is like in Paul's time. There was no Kenwood either then. So, I mean, that's how we can always gauge how old people are, is where they went to school, right? So, before then, and before the Brown versus Board of Education desegregation piece happened. I mean, no one here doesn't know that Chicago is the most segregated city in the country, right? We do know that, right? So we're going to have honest conversations here. So in an attempt to integrate the schools, one of the first things that happened was an integration of the faculty. So faculty were moved around places, and people that didn't want to go to the South Side, like at Lane Tech, just changed their names to something like Joe Green became Jose Verde. You think I'm kidding? This is a true story. I think he's dead, God rest his soul, so I'm not in too much trouble, but I know that guy did that. So this kind of stuff happened to integrate the faculty. And all the research shows is that when students have an opportunity to go to school in an integrated environment, it actually ameliorates some of the lessons of poverty and some of the effects of poverty. So the attempt to integrate schools was to open up magnets by having children test in. So this is where all this stuff came. So then we get a Whitney Young, we get Northside College Prep, we get Walter Payton, we get Jones, we get, other schools, but also in elementary schools. So the issue is that we start creaming out of neighborhood schools. So, and to a much bigger rate. So while something had good intentions, there are always unintended consequences. This is one of the things that we feel very strongly about, that before you make a decision about doing something, ask those 3 Lonnie Guinier questions. Note I gave her credit. They didn't come from me, because people think I'm just like really brilliant. But I just teased that from her. So the unintended consequences are the creaming of neighborhood schools. So then the charter movement, which actually started out, as many people know, as a group of teachers trying to get together to figure out how to address needs of children in dire straits, got morphed and sort of rearranged from some of that, but also some of the remnants of the voucher movement that didn't go so well. So there are all these different things that are going on, and then we're still doing a little bit of creaming there, and then even though, charters always love to say we don't cream, not by the same method, but there's creaming. So what we have is a 3-tiered, and I would even venture to say it's even a much more complicated number than a 3-tiered system, but it is problematic, so.
Madam President, I know you're in charge at the meetings, but a little shorter answers.
Yes, sir. Sorry.
I got to. Just talking from Avant. By the way.
I'm teaching here. What do you?
How many public school graduates? Raise your hand. You got to. All right, there you go.
Very nice.
All right. This is from, is that Nikhil Angelo? Okay. High school science teacher, parent, organizer. Whoa, right up your alley. As a former teacher, I crave peer collaboration review. Diane Ravitch, who you were here when she spoke, also endorses peer review as part of the evaluations. Why did the union advocate against peer review and name it as a victory this last bargaining process?
Yeah, because we're not ready for that yet. I think peer review is probably one of the best ways to go. But, there's still a lot of lack of trust. And we need to rebuild that, and we need to appropriately train people. So you're absolutely right. I totally agree with you. Someone who knows what it is I teach is clearly better than I, but we're not there yet.
We have several questions, many of them unsigned. There's a fellow in Chicago who's quoting Shakespeare now, so I'll join in. Cowards die many times before their death. The valiant taste death but once. But here we go. I will read 2 of them. There's plenty of them. Can you name 1 or 2 companies that make profits running schools in Chicago? Instead of corporate meddling, would you prefer that Chicago corporations sit on the sidelines and not try to help our schools get better? Well, that's enough.
All right. No, but I would like, I don't want to do the name game and blame people, because then they'll come up and say they're not doing that, and then it's just going to be a whole lot of he said, she said. But what I will say is that I don't think they should sit on the sidelines. I think they should do what they do when they give money to the Lyric Opera. I don't believe they go to the Lyric Opera, give money, and then go tell the singers how to sing. I don't believe they do that. So give your money. Where's Andrew Carnegie when he need him? Give your money and walk away, buddies. You know, just leave it alone. When you don't know something, don't dilettante your way into it. I could call a couple of names, but I'm not going to get into that fight.
That's okay. Turning this into
Op-ed writers and...
You're turning into a fill-in-the-blank contest here.
I know, it's terrible, right?
Leslie, I can't read that. Fox? Leslie Fox. Okay, this is a yes or no answer.
No.
You haven't heard the question, but I think it's the right answer. Did you ever hear from Rahm post-strike? Did he reach out to you? Good question.
I thought I answered it. I actually read it, so I had a little premonition. Go ahead, Paul.
This may go down as one of the great moments in City Club history. This is from former newspaper tycoon Madeline Dubeck, who's now working for Reboot Illinois. Please describe a teacher evaluation process that you and the union would accept.
I would love an evaluation process that I think we sort of negotiated. We negotiated the best part, which is evaluating teacher practice based on evidence. So we actually have that in this new contract. What I do not like and what I do not agree with and what I will never agree with, but which was rammed down our throats, is tying student test score to teachers, because there is no correlation. It doesn't work. It doesn't make sense. The math is fuzzy. I wish I had a copy of the basic equation that I could write up here for you. And it is not only that, it's insulting to assume that student outcome has anything to do with simply input. So the problem is we're seeing the ravages of this kind of stuff in places like DC and places like Baltimore, where people are having serious problems with what their evaluations are. Evaluations should be designed to make you better, not trying to figure out a way to disempower you. So that's my issue.
Okay. This is from one of the pride and joy of Sullivan High School, our own board member, Ed Mazer, who reminds you that Nautilus is Sullivan spelled backwards. But of course, you knew that.
He told me.
Yeah. How does the fact that no member of the Chicago Public School Board has children in the schools affect public education?
So I believe that in the November 6th election, for those 300 plus precincts that were given the opportunity to vote, voted to have an elected representative school board. It's certainly a much more democratic way of doing things. I think you can have children and not, I think anyone can actually be a school board member. I think it certainly helps if you're invested in your child's education, but I don't think that everyone that sits on the board has to have children in the school system, but it doesn't hurt. So I think that's something that needs to have another look at.
Okay, we're doing a little overtime. The questions are so long. Gail Ward, retired founding principal, Walter Payton College Prep. Where are you, Gail?
I saw her earlier. Where is she? Oh, right over there.
In the corner, back to the wall. Excellent. You have been a teacher in a selective enrollment high school. What is your thinking about replicating more selective enrollment schools?
I don't know why every single school in the city of Chicago can't have what selective enrollment schools have. The problem with selective enrollment is that the ranking and sorting of children, as far as I'm concerned, does not bring about the kind of rich, diverse, communities that we really have. So what I would like to see is that we should be able to have all children go together, because guess what? Children who are at the very lowest performing group do much better when they are exposed to children of the very highest group. We've known that. That's why people have stopped tracking. I mean, they've done this kind of research. But the key is parents don't want their children with those people. I don't want my kids with those kids. So that's why we need to rank and sort, so we can identify our kids and those kids. So the problem is, I worked in selective enrollment schools for the majority of my career, 15 years at Lane, 4 years at King, and I mean, that's where they would hire me. It wasn't like I didn't try Hope College Prep. That had 2 chemistry openings. It wouldn't take me, but except for they call me 2 days before school starts. So I just think the key is to replicate not the process of selecting children out, but replicate the process of making sure every neighborhood school has a variety of things to offer children, so people that would normally go to those schools would actually want to be in neighborhood schools.
Okay. We only have 3 more questions left. I'm combining 3. These will be the sandbag questions. You're used to this. I mean, I'm not going to tell you they're not. One will be a positive one, and then we'll have to close with Mark Weiermuller, who just won that thing yesterday when he won't win again, guaranteed. Okay, which is a very good question to end this conversation. These are the sandbag questions, and I say that only because I won't read the names. 2 of them have names, but here we go. This is from, I will read the names. Alex Murray, isn't your emphasis on the impact of poverty really a slander against the poor and a smoke screen protecting the decay of the urban family structure? You talked about factors that, this is from Rich Lenker, you talked about the factors that punish CPS students. Wasn't a 1-week strike that you led punishment? And number 3, Karen, this is unsigned. By the way, they call you Karen, so that's good. Your comment about steel mills and stockyards suggests that dropping out of high school was okay before, but now is a problem. Did you really mean that? Answer any or all 3 of those.
Sure. So let's take the last one first and work our way backwards. No, that's not what I was talking about. What I was talking about is that there were jobs available for students who did drop out of high school, who were not engaged in the curriculum or whatever. We have to remember, compulsory high school wasn't even around until the 1930s. That's when high school started being compulsory. This is a relatively new phenomenon. So the key is that I wanted to put some historical context. Nobody wants children to drop out of school. I mean, that's not at all what I was saying, and if that's how you took that away, you need to come see me, and so we can have another conversation. Did a 1-week strike punish students? No. What a 1-week strike told our students is that you must stand up for injustice. You must do it. There were plenty of students on picket lines across the city learning what it means to be part of a collective process, to take responsibility for whole. And I know people say, well, strike, you're still being meant to the children. That is a false set of logic. But, you know, if you need to hold on to it, do so. No, I mean, it's okay, but I mean, because people believe that, I mean, you're certainly entitled to. Isn't the impact of poverty really a slander against the poor? Absolutely not. It is not. Children do not choose their parents. They don't. So it is a slander against the fact that as the richest country on the planet, we have not figured out a way to address issues of poverty. In the entire political, yeah, I know, that's, you know, come on. That's just no-brainer. In the entire political discourse, poverty wasn't discussed because in our culture, and this is another thing that's different from Finland, so it's hard to like pull things out, but in our culture, we criminalize poverty. We treat poor people as if they deserve whatever happens to them. There's something wrong with that. But it also gives us comfort. I mean, it's like one of the things that I had issue with is that some of these schools that are recruiting people to come to their schools, the charter schools, I'm going to say it out loud, do so by not talking about how great they are, but trying to denigrate Chicago Public Schools. And at one recent meeting, a young student was brought out to talk about how bad Lane Tech was, that children were dealing drugs in the halls, and because she didn't have really nice clothes, and because there wasn't a uniform policy, that children were teasing her every day because she couldn't buy designer clothes. I think this is the kind of stuff that we need to stop doing. If your stuff is good, one of the things we did when we ran for election, not knowing that we would ever win, was that we did not attack the former administration. What we basically did was talk about what we were doing, what was positive. We are not going to do, they suck, vote for us. I mean, didn't we have enough of that? I mean, good grief. I don't know how I made it through this last campaign season, and we didn't live in a battleground state. Thank God.
All right, here we go. Two quick.
Oh, I thought you got more?
Well,
all right, go ahead. I got this.
Unaccustomed
Go
as
ahead,
you are to
Paul.
speaking, I mean. This is from Katie McCormick, and not just because I like the name. As I learn more about these issues, I'm curious. This is a very good question. Is there anything you would have said or done differently over the last year?
Yes.
It was a good question. The answer was a little. Now you're turning into fill in the blank. Okay. To close, Mark Weiermuller, it's a good question. I'm only asking you. I want great schools, but I cannot afford more property taxes. Where do we get the money?
Ooh, I love this one. Move out the way, Paul. I'm ready now. Yeah, we absolutely have to have a better funding stream, and we also have to stay out of our minds that we can't pay taxes. I don't know where that happened, that we expect to have great services and not pay for them. But I will tell you that in this city, we are blessed with amazing corporations that do so much good and have, who would benefit, the schools could benefit easily from a very, very nominal increase in taxes. We believe strongly in the, I'm sorry, what? No, I'm not thinking about donations, because when people stop wanting to donate, they stop. So we need to have a revenue stream that is something that we can count on. That's one of the big problems about public-private partnerships. But, a financial transactions tax wouldn't hurt, just a penny for a kid, just a penny. A transaction. CME, if any of you all are here. Let's go.